Hi, everybody. Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping and EFT so you can eliminate self-sabotage and take the action that you want. Just a quick reminder, there's still time to sign up for our Mastering the Art of Delivery training, where over the course of 2 days, I'm going to teach you the approaches that I use when I'm tapping on my own and when I'm working with clients. The skills that I'm going to teach you are going to help you to find root causes faster, to be more effective in your tapping, which means that you will get relief and transformation much quicker. If you'd like more information about the class, all you need to do is go to masteringtheartofdelivery.com. That's masteringtheartofdelivery.com. And if you use the discount code podcast, you will receive 50% off of the training. And at the moment of recording this, the first weekend is almost full. The reason why I'm doing it 3 weekends is each weekend I'm doing it at a different time so that it is easy for you wherever you are in the world. The third weekend is specifically built for those of you in Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Very rarely do you have things that are created on this side of the world done at a time where it is convenient for you. And so the third training that I am going to do, I'm actually going to do at a time that is convenient for your side of the world. Masteringtheartofdelivery.com. Use the coupon code podcast.
I'd say, so how did your tapping go? And I didn't do that. And so over and over and over again, I would say, what got in your way? And they would say, well, I didn't know what to tap on.
This is G. Montrestelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 472, originally aired July 29th, 2020. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we are going to talk about what you should do when you don't know what to say when you are tapping. Before we do that, I just want to send a big shout out and thank you to all of the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. Those supporters make sure that you receive this free training every single week. A special note to the supporters. Over the course of the last week, I did 3 Zoom trainings on self-criticism, procrastination, and self-worth. If you go into the supporters portal, you will see links to be able to download those 3 trainings absolutely free. If you would like to support the Tapping Q&A podcast, receive some amazing gifts and bonuses like free training like they are receiving, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. When talking to clients and asking them about their life between sessions and how they are doing tapping on their own, very regularly clients do not tap on their own. Even though we know tapping is a tool that is super, super easy to do, but when you are in a situation where you are working with a well-skilled practitioner or you're tapping along to an audio or a tapping script that is written by someone who knows what they're doing, it can feel almost effortless. That in the moment when you're tapping along, it's like, oh, they're saying something obvious. Of course, that is what I tap on. That is absolutely brilliant. This is so easy. And then you get home and you're in a situation where you're now having to come up with those words on your own. And even if you're not working with a practitioner, I'm sure you've been in the situation where you don't know exactly what to say. And when we don't know what to say or we don't know where to start, we typically just don't do it. Like it's hard to begin. And so today I have a conversation with my friend Nancy Forrester. Nancy runs the National EFT Training Institute up in Canada. And Nancy has created a way in which we can kind of approach tapping at 3 different levels, which makes it easier for us to be able to tap, particularly when we don't know what to say. And so here's my conversation with Nancy Forrester on the easiest ways that you can start when you don't know what to say when you are tapping. One of the conversations I'm consistently having with my clients is the subtle difference between something being simple and something being easy. And I think one of the really beautiful things about tapping is it is simple. I have taught tapping to total strangers on the back of a bar napkin in 5 minutes. But just because it is simple, it does not mean that it is easy to use. And people who are starting out in their tapping journey will be in a class, will be in a workshop, they'll be working with someone who's really skilled, and they're blown away by how effective it is. And we're clearing these traumas, and we're doing memory consolidation, and all of this amazing stuff is happening. And then they get home and they have a little drawing of the tapping points, and they have some phrases to say. But because it's weird, it's hard to sit down and do it on their own. And because there's not an obvious entry point, it becomes really, really hard to start on their own after you gave them the basic tapping stuff. What are things that you'd want to give them? And they could be a disposition, they could be a technique, they could be an approach that makes it easier for someone to take this deceptively simple thing and make it so it's something that is useful for them.
Yeah, I've had exactly the same experience, Gene, having been a psychotherapist for many, many years before I found tapping. And it took me a while to integrate tapping into my life. I had exactly the same issues. And then when I did get to the place where I was introducing this to my clients, yeah, they would go home. I'd have these big expectations. You do all this tapping and then you come back. You're going to be a brand new client. We're going to pick up from there. It's going to be so exciting. And they would come back and I'd say, so how did your tapping go? And I didn't do that. And so over and over and over again, I would say, what got in your way? And they would say, well, I didn't know what to tap on. So that was one issue. It's like, well, if I'm going to spend the time I intend to promoting this, I've got to solve that issue. And another issue, same kind of an issue, was I would go out and I would present to groups of therapists or groups of educators, groups of coaches, and they'd be all excited. And then inevitably, the first question that would come from the crowd was, well, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a licensed medical or mental health person. And so I'm not going to do this. The third issue around this was that people were believing that tapping was only about stress management, at most self-regulation. And I'm sitting there going, it is so much more. How can I get it across that there are some entryways here that you can build on and build on and build on and build on to eventually get to this, whole approach that we know as gold standard EFT. So what I created was what we call the bronze, silver, gold approach. And the whole idea is that it is a little bit by a little bit by a little bit.
Right.
And what I found is that people adapt to it quite naturally, and they find that entry point in order to get into it.
Okay. So just talk to me kind of high level. What's like the difference between those three and what we're thinking as we're kind of approaching that as an approach?
Yeah, very simple, as you say, that it's based around this question about, I don't know what to say. So the first level, the bronze, what we call the bronze standard, is, well, then don't say anything. Solve the problem this way.
Yeah.
And so we have a set of interventions which don't require people to actually say anything. It's just really requiring them to tap on the points. And that in itself is incredibly helpful. If someone will even take a few minutes a day to do these bronze standard approaches, they're chipping away over time at what is blocking them from what they desire.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. It's something I use quite a bit, and I found it useful in a couple of ways. So for myself, I always end my day with just 8 to 10 minutes of tapping, where I'm not thinking of anything in general, just letting that do that. I found myself where I'm actually starting tapping sessions now, where the first thing that we do is, it looks much more like thought field therapy. Like we're doing a little follow the leader as we're tapping along, just kind of clearing the deck.
Yeah,
and I think one of the things that is useful is that we show up with a constellation of emotions. Rarely do we show up with a single emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And when we show up with a constellation of emotions, the entry point is really, really difficult to find because it's just this miasma of all the stuff that is there. And so for someone who is unskilled, that becomes really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find, tapping without words is kind of like burning off the mist in the backyard in the morning.
Exactly.
And as the mist starts to clear away, all of a sudden, the tree comes into focus or the shed comes into focus. And as that happens, I'm able to describe what's going on. And so by giving people permission, not having to say anything at the beginning, it gives us the ability to start getting clarity. Because I think that we say the more specific you are, the more effective the tapping is going to be. And we know that to be true. Like I had a really awesome conversation with David Feinstein yesterday that we're going to be sharing in the podcast as well about what's actually going on as we're consolidating memories. And that specificity is super useful. But I think the mistake people make is we say as specific as possible, and people mistake that for I have to be specific. Yeah. And sometimes as specific as possible is I am ticked off.
Yes.
That is as specific as I can get. And for someone who's just been introduced to tapping, like, what do I say? Well, I have to be able to describe what is going on. I don't know any more information than that. And it's really hard for me to do anything. But what you're doing is you're in this first level, what you're calling the bronze level, is this introduction just saying that tap, that's specific enough. I am present in my moment, in my body to this thing. And that's where I'm going to start.
Yeah. And one of my other concerns right from the beginning, I mean, I was introduced to tapping in the very, very beginning, sort of mid-90s, but I'd been coming at it from a place about 7 years as a psychotherapist and a certain level of disillusionment with psychotherapy in terms of, okay, well, people were loving coming to my sessions and we would be getting results in one area, but they couldn't sustain those results. It's like, well, what is going on here? I'm also coming from a science background going, well, there's got to be some way that to integrate, some way to make these significant changes sustainable. And so I was fortunate to join a small group of colleagues who at the time were really, really focused on how the body defends itself against threat. And so we actually developed our version of what has become so popular as the polyvagal theory with Dr. Stephen Porges. And so one of my concerns about the early levels of people tapping is that they don't have any concept of what their capacity is in their nervous system. So a client may come in and they've actually got a huge capacity and they could look at getting more specific more quickly. But on the other hand, we don't know that until we get a sense of where the tapping is. So this bronze level gives us a chance, both if you're doing your own tapping on your own to assess your nervous system, but also as a practitioner. The other thing that became clear early on is that tapping works beautifully on our own, but its real power comes in relationship with another human being. And that's because we create a system. So there's the client and there's the practitioner. So it's not only the client's capacity within their nervous system, but it's also the practitioner's. And so it's what is the capacity of that system to be able to get more specific more quickly. And so bronze standard gives us an opportunity to do a lot of porch work. Just a lot of let's go up a step on the porch here and we'll just see how this goes. We don't have to go yank open the door or the window and try to get in there. We can just see where we're at. Otherwise, my metaphor is if you're going too fast too soon, it's like you're a pressure cooker and there's a lot of pressure built up there. And unless you have a way to just sort of take some of that pressure off, right, you're going to open the whole pressure cooker and you're going to have turnip all over the ceiling.
Yeah.
And it's hard to clean that up.
I like the way that you've described it as a system. I've never thought about it specifically as that way. The way I always think, like when I'm explaining my value as a practitioner to someone, I always say I bring three things to the table. Yeah. One, I bring experience. More than likely, the issues that we are working on, particularly 15 years into my career, this is not the first time I've been down this particular road. Yeah. The second thing is I have expertise. I have subtle tools that I have added to my toolbox that allow me to do art of delivery in a way that is more powerful than the people I'm working with. And the third is I'm not in the middle of your brain. Yeah. like I am standing outside of this and I have this opportunity to look at it from a distance. And just not being in the middle of your head, I think, is as equally as valuable as those other two. And so the way that you're describing it is the capacity of the system is enhanced because we have two people there. And, in this case, like the way my vocabulary is, I have perspective that you don't have.
Yes.
You've named it as capacities away. And so it's just a vocabulary difference of seeing the exact same thing, but how incredibly powerful that is.
And that capacity is energetic, right? So yes, you've got skills and you've got experience and ways that you speak of things, but that's not just cognitive. That's energetic. That's in your nervous system. And nervous systems are always co-regulating with each other, right? We know that now. And so that is enormously helpful. We talk about just being a presence in the room, just bringing a more regulated nervous system into the vicinity of a less regulated one is helpful.
It's interesting. A number of episodes ago, I talked to Robin Balzerian about compassion fatigue and this idea of where we are being traumatized by the same thing. And so in that case, it's just the opposite effect. Is that the co-regulation is happening in such a way that I am being traumatized by the thing that you are bringing up, either because it is in my past experience or something like a global pandemic where we're experiencing it together, where instead of me being able to bring you up, I am going down with you. And that co-regulation doesn't necessarily mean that we're always drifting up. And so we need to be really particularly careful and paying attention to that whenever we're engaging in that and regulating, okay, how is my resource state changing as I'm engaging in this particular system?
Absolutely. My metaphor for that is back in the day when I used to play a lot of tennis. And when I would play tennis with someone who was more skilled than I was, my skill level would automatically go up. But when I played somebody who wasn't as skilled, mine goes down. And so this is what's behind how we say it's so important to do our own work as a practitioner, incredibly important to do our own work because, and the other piece of this, it goes to this trauma-informed idea that if you have a practitioner who hasn't yet done a lot of their own personal work, and they take a modality like EFT and they get very excited about what that modality can do, but they bring that to a nervous system that is not ready, that doesn't have the capacity yet, then they are literally putting themselves in a position where their nervous system isn't going to be able to sustain its capacity in that moment. And hence we get this incredible secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. It was one of the exciting things to me about EFT way back in the day when I first learned it. Was one of my concerns as a psychotherapist was I was loving my work. I was loving seeing the changes people were making, but I was exhausted at the end of the day. And it didn't seem to matter what I was doing. I was exhausted at the end of the day. And it started to impact on the quality of my life. And I remember saying to myself, I love this work. I love these clients, but I'm literally not willing to die for them. And then I started researching the statistics around caregiver fatigue, chronic illness in this field. And I went, there's got to be a way around this. And so doing my own EFT, both before, after sessions, and during, just changed that whole experience.
What then is the silver level? If the bronze is just tapping without words, what's the next step up? What can we expect? How do we do it?
There's a lot of techniques too in the bronze level that speak to this issue that you're talking about, where people come in with this whole complexity, this constellation of emotions. And one of the ways that you can address that right at the bronze level is just to structure it for them. Just say to them, what is it that you're angry about right now? Right? I'm angry that. Sentence completion. I'm angry that. Right? One sentence. And then what else are you angry about? Sentence completion. What else are you angry about? Sentence completion. So there's no expectation to be diving deeper into this. And then this beautiful sentence when they say, well, I'm not angry about anything else. And you say, if you had to be angry about one more thing, and you get that little nugget.
Yeah. I do very similar things. I do them in the opposite order. Like when I'm teaching people to do it on their own, it's like, give me the details, tell me how you feel. Give me the details, tell me how you feel.
Yeah.
And the phrase that I like to use is, I know you don't know the answer to this question,
right.
But if you did know the answer to this question, what is one more thing that you might be angry about?
Yeah.
Kind of sneaking in the back door and giving them space to do that. The other thing I think is really important to recognize is that there's an agreement on what someone thinks the relationship is supposed to be like.
Mm-hmm.
People, as silly as this sounds, want to perform for the practitioner that they are working with. And we constantly need to be giving the people we're working with permission to show up in the way that makes the most sense for them. So one of the kind of techniques I use is I call it the rule of three.
Mm-hmm.
That if I am saying, hey, how do you experience something? It might be A, B, or C, but C is always something that is not culturally typical. So like, I feel afraid. Great. Do you feel butterflies in your stomach?
Mm-hmm.
Are your hands sweaty? Does it feel like your hair is on fire? Because if I say butterflies in your stomach, hands sweaty, tight chest, they're going to culturally define this is what fear is supposed to be. So I'm going to choose the thing that is closest to my cultural experience.
Right.
And by giving something wacky, it gives them permission to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
By asking that question, great, you're done with that list. If there was one other thing, what would it be? Because it's possible that they've come to the end of the list because they've come to the end of the list of acceptable things.
Exactly.
And you're giving them space to say something that is outside of that, which oftentimes is the linchpin, because it's the one that is, because I don't have the vocabulary for it. It's outside my experience. I don't want to acknowledge it. I don't want to engage with it. And it gives me the capacity to engage with it in a really different way.
In a very structured, short way without having to go into it.
Yep.
And so then when we're finished the anger piece, then we move to the next sort of typical emotion, which would be sadness. And this technique is called emptying the jug. It's an old Virginia Satir technique from way back. So we do the same thing around sadness. We do the same thing around fear, worry, anxiety, whatever the client's words are. And then when all of that emotional jug has been diffused a little bit, then we can go to the glad. And I'm really glad that. What else are you really glad about? And so what I find is that, and of course we're tapping it the whole time we're doing this, is that it just gives a little bit of relief so that the nervous system can calm down in that moment. And what the presenting issue is then is we can focus on it more clearly. So then the silver standard is where, so we still don't know which words to use, but somebody else does. And so we're going to use their words. So your podcast is just a beautiful example of this, where you're using all your experience. You're suggesting, here are some ideas that you could bring into some tapping phrases around this. And so again, that nervous system is just leaning on yours and your experience to be able to just gradually start opening up to what its level of truth is. And so I think the silver level is enormously helpful when done well. The challenge, of course, is that there are some people who are offering these ideas and scripts that are just not well crafted and themselves be harmful. So, but in its place, I see a great use both for people doing their own personal work, but also for practitioners to be able to offer these silver standard scripts for people to be able to lean on, particularly outside of the sessions that they're doing with people. Then what that allows us to do is offer a gold standard where people are seeing the real depth and the breadth of EFT. Differentiate between tapping being sort of the bronze and the silver levels, and then EFT being this gold standard. How can we really get to what these core issues are? How can we get to the limiting beliefs? How can we get to the issues that created those limiting beliefs in the first place? But how can we do that in a really trauma-friendly way where it is going at a pace that is unique to those nervous systems in the room, right? So looking at a really phased approach that is focused on trauma recovery. I mean, my position is that there isn't any one of us who isn't recovering from trauma and will be for the rest of our lives. And so how can we focus this gold standard EFT on a trauma recovery approach which improves the quality of life today? When I was doing psychotherapy school, and it's still the same today, there's this underlying assumption that unless you're doing trauma resolution, unless you're going there, you're not doing anything that's worthwhile. And yet the risks of trauma resolution before a nervous system is ready are enormous. You can do a lot of harm if it's not a conscious decision to do that.
The other thing that's important in what you're naming in there is this idea of what's the goal of what we're doing?
Yeah.
The goal of what we're doing is to make my life better, for me to be healthier, for me to make better choices. And Dan Cleary introduced this concept to me a million years ago. And I think it's in one of the first 10 episodes of the podcast from 11 years ago, is we introduced this idea called the 10% solution.
Yes, exactly.
And the idea is, how does your life change if we solve 10% of this problem? Because the reality is, for some issues, it is possible for me to clear up half of the problem and for me to no longer have that problem impacting my life in a material way at all, because the things that last half of it that aren't ever being touched or triggered, because I'm not in the circumstances where I am re-engaging with that memory. I am re-engaging with that model because it's a model of something that is so outside of my experience. It doesn't matter if I have a misinformed model in that particular case.
Right.
The other thing it does is that, and this is, years ago, I was working with someone who, I think she was only tapping with me to shut her husband up, and showed up very begrudgingly to what was going on. And in 15 minutes, went from being skeptical to being really disappointed that we hadn't knocked out this childhood trauma in one round of tapping. Yeah. In 15 minutes went from, this is a bunch of crap, to, oh my gosh, I can't believe how slow this is. I have a couple of stories of really amazing things that I've seen with clients that I never tell in public. Just because I don't want to make the edge cases the normal case, because it gives us this impression that I really think one session and 1 minute miracles do us a disservice because we want to go there so quickly. And it's okay if it takes 6 sessions, because if something takes 6 sessions, it is possible in another therapeutic setting that could be taking 16 months. And yes, it would be great if I could do 1 round of tapping and be done with this, or I could do it in 1 session, but also for us to be managing our expectations in a healthy way, that I am all for going too slow with a client in order for us to, 1, be safe, and to 2, not have like some cotton candy high quick fix, but doing foundational work, because this isn't, like, there is tapping that we do that is about regulating my emotion in my moment. Yep. Like, there's triage tapping. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about transformation stuff. So it's not about feeling good right now. It's about changing for the long term. And I am okay if we go slower in order for that to be the case. It's a gentler process. It's an easier process. It's more lasting. And so the fact that you're naming this as something that's important for us, I think is really valuable for people to hear.
Absolutely. I love that you're talking about transformation, because that's the challenge. That what I see happening a lot in the EFT world is this 1 minute magic miracle thing and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's not the way change happens for human beings. I often say to people, if I had a magic wand and I could bop you over the head with it right now, and all of a sudden this problem would not be there, like, I would think carefully about whether I would even use that magic wand, because human systems aren't designed for that big of an energetic shift that quickly. It changes everything. So if we think of a situation where, say, there's a client who had a childhood trauma, and the residue of that trauma is impacting so many different areas of her life today. It's impacting her relationship with her partner. It's impacting her career choices. It's impacting her finances. It's impacting all over. If I come along and magically remove that trauma, all of those areas of her life are going into disarray all at once. And she doesn't have the skills or the experience to be able to manage that. So if we imagine that client, that female client of mine, had 3 children under the age of 10, and now all of a sudden she has a life in chaos. Now I'm setting the children up for dysregulation. So I think we need to be very careful to embed EFT within a transformational framework that makes sense. It's not just about EFT. It's about how do human beings change? So, when you speak about Cleary's work around the very small, minute little changes, why does that make sense? It's because that's manageable. We can do what we call phase 1 EFT, which is about releasing energetic blockages, freeing up the energy. But then the question becomes, what are you going to do with that energy? And so we have what we call phase 4, which is about, well, where are we going to focus that energy? Well, we're going to focus it on a very small, minute change that is meaningful to that client at this point in time. And they have then the motivation and the energy available to make that small change, which is then going to be motivating toward the next cycle of let's release some more energy, let's focus it toward the next small change. And in that way, the client ends up with improved quality of life.
We don't often think of the things that we need to transform as functional.
Right.
And they are. Like, they might not be functioning well. They might be functioning in ways that is causing problems, but they are functioning. And based on the information the system has, it's really doing the best job that it can.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the reasons why, there's oftentimes resistance to change is the crap I know is better than the crap I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, our subconscious mind is biased towards predictable. It wants to be in a circumstance where it knows what's going on, because the moment something becomes unpredictable, it becomes dangerous.
Absolutely.
This might be really bad, but it is predictable. It's the reason why, and I'm sure you see this as well, when you're working with folks the difference between someone who has had trauma that has happened to them in a safe space as a child versus trauma happening to them in an unsafe space.
Yeah.
I'm camping with my family. Someone throws a rubber snake in my sleeping bag. I'm now afraid of snakes.
Right.
Like, I was in safety when I had something that was traumatic. That is something that's so easy to knock out quickly. And that's
Absolutely.
part of the reason why phobias and fears are so easy to take care of in that setting, is because typically it is an initial sensitizing event that happened in safety.
Yeah.
But if I'm dealing in a circumstance where I have an alcoholic parent, I have a bipolar parent, where I as a child can act the exact same way 2 days in a row and cannot get a predictable response, then that puts my system into this fight, flight, or freeze every single moment, because nothing is predictable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so that is such a thing that is so much harder. And so when we're functioning out of these things that have been informed by our trauma, it's at least predictable. And so as we're creating transformation, we need to be replacing tools that are less functional with tools that are more functional.
Right. Little bit by little bit by little bit.
Yeah.
And so when we look at a phased approach to all of this thing, phase 1 is really about the current day. It's the here and now. And there's so much, because all of the residue of trauma energetically is in the here and now. We can actually get an awful lot of mileage looking at, well, this event happened. I was running down by the lake this morning and somebody jogged by me and they breathed on me. And that was an upsetting event. Well, to really dig down into that, well, what was it that was so upsetting about that? Well, that's going to be able to lead us to a limiting belief that comes from this early trauma that you're talking about. And so really almost exhausting the current day in order to get all of the low-hanging fruit, in a sense, right?
It's the reason why my favorite place to start is, what are the actions you want to take that you don't want to be taking? Yeah. Like, it just, because, and that's for two reasons. One is, it's the thing I'm most in tune with. And two is, it's the most bang for the buck. Like, I'm not like, I have always had this super strong aversion to the personal peace procedure.
Yes, absolutely.
Just because then I'm clearing trauma for trauma's sake that may or may not impact. And I'm not saying that clearing trauma is a bad thing, but I want to be clearing the piece that is getting in the way of what I'm doing today. And that could be a big thing. It could be a small thing from my past. It doesn't matter, because it's the one that is most important, because it's preventing what is going on. It doesn't matter what's going on in a car if a $3 fuse in the circuit board that is affecting the starter isn't working. That's not a big thing, but it's the thing that's preventing the car from moving forward. So it's the most important thing for me to working on the car to make it move again, so the electricity moves through it.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that is kind of interesting inside of this is that Oftentimes doing a phased approach, we mistake it as something that is much bigger than that because it's kind of like it looks as if all of the sprouts in my garden happened overnight. But in reality, there was 18 days of this seed germinating, and all of a sudden it went boop overnight. And I could see that. And when we're doing a phased approach, there are all of these changes that are lining up, and then all of a sudden they fall into place together, and it looks as if the last thing that I tapped on created this quantum leap in change.
Right.
But in reality, there was all of this internal change, but the gears now click in such a way that there's a huge amount of change that is happening at once, but it's happened because of this incremental small moments that we're mistaking because we only see the outcome of
Absolutely. It's the teeter-totter approach, right? That you're at the top of the teeter-totter and you're coming down little bit by little bit by little bit by little bit, but then all of a sudden it's that last little piece and boom, the whole thing. And it's like, wow, why didn't I just do that last little thing at the start? Well, because the last thing then would have been the first thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it becomes this cumulative thing.
Yeah. The other piece about this focus on the current here and now is its power in changing our identity, who we see ourselves to be in the world. So if you can focus on, what is the activity, what are the actions that you're taking now that you don't want to be? And who do you see yourself as being when you take those actions? Perhaps somebody says, I'm not worthy because I'm eating chips every day. And if you can then use the current here and now to identify that limiting belief and do some very simple work to just chip away at that limiting belief, right? You're getting at the core identities that have created the dissatisfaction in the current day. But you're doing it in a way which is allowing the quality of life today to improve.
And it's really interesting, that identity piece and how we see ourselves when we're doing something. I help people create podcasts in addition to podcasting myself. And I was at a podcasting event last year and I was talking to someone and she said, "What happens if no one listens?" Pause. What happens if people listen? And both of those were identity pieces about taking this action, how I'm going to be seen in the world. Either I'm going to do something and I'm going to fail and I'm going to be seen as that, or I'm going to do something and I succeed and I'm going to be seen as something completely different. And by recognizing the way that we are defining ourselves based on who we see ourselves as and the actions we do, all people like X don't do that, therefore I don't do that.
Exactly. And so if you can, in the here and now, help them to change a little piece of that behavior, right?
Yeah.
And then you can come in and ask the question, who must you be in order to have taken that small behavior? You see the change in the identity.
And that's part of the reason why I pay such close attention as a practitioner to the vocabulary that my clients are using to describe their life. Because we emotionally respond to the world in the way that we describe it, not even necessarily the way that we understand it. That I understand it one way, but I start describing it this way, I'm going to respond emotionally to the description of this moment, not this understanding that I have. And so it becomes not only an identity piece of myself, but it's how I identify the world, how I identify my coworkers, how I identify a workplace, how I identify opportunities. It's going to cause me to emotionally respond and then act in a way that is reflective of that particular understanding.
Absolutely. The other piece that I just want to mention quickly when we're talking about these past painful events that happened before the here and now is that in a phased approach, again, it's a layered approach. So as we leave the current experiences of life, what would naturally come next? Well, we would look at adult events because resolving an adult trauma is much easier than resolving a childhood trauma because adults have resources available to them at the time. But even within that phase 2 adult events, I think it's really important to distinguish between events that are almost acts of God, earthquakes or floods or accidents, those kind of things, versus the relational events. And because the relational events are just more difficult for human beings to process because we're relational beings, right? We're built with a nervous system. And so rather than starting with somebody's, experience of getting divorced after 25 years of marriage, right? That's probably going to be a more difficult resolution than some other non-relational. And then that builds our capacity to then look at phase 3, which is all the childhood stuff, all of the developmental and the attachment work, which is the core of so much that's going on in the here and now. But really taking a very conscious approach where both the practitioner and the client are just stopping and having a really good, transparent conversation about, is this time? Is this safe? Is this even necessary?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you're making a key distinction there between something that is happening externally and something that's happening in the context of a relationship. Mm-hmm. Because, we are tribal people.
Yeah.
And 7,000 years ago, if I was pushed outside of the tribe, I died.
Yes.
When I am having some sort of struggle inside of a relationship, it is speaking specifically to that safety issue. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like it is something that is it is more about who I am than my place in the world. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it can feel significantly more treacherous as we step into that. We try and navigate that particular piece.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So much more likely for the nervous system to go to its strongest defense systems, right? Rather than fight or flight, that we go to the freeze area, which by itself is more difficult and requires a slower, more conscious pace to resolve.
And it's really interesting as you say that. I had a client of mine yesterday in her notes before we get in. She's like, the first thing it says, I have to tell you a bear story. And so she lives in Alberta, and her and her partner were out hiking, and they ran into a 3-year-old black bear, which is, it's not a grizzly bear, it's not a polar bear, but it's still a bear.
Yep.
But she said is that when her and her dog were encountering this bear, she jumped off her bike or got her bear spray and she went into it. And she said, it was the first time in my life I didn't go into freeze, I went into fight. And that, so she even recognized the fact that she was emotionally regulating in a different way in the moment in responding to this. She said, I give all the credit to all the work that we've been doing in my business and helping me to show up in a different way and feeling safe in the world. Like that was specifically the stuff we had tapped on previously before this, but she was self-aware enough because of the work that she does, be able to draw the connection between us making it safe for her to show up in her business to, I didn't go into freeze, I went into fight.
Yes.
And recognizing that where she's moving up in that.
Exactly. And to stay aware that she's resourced in that moment, that she has the bear spray. Right?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And just stepped into this place and moved to a place that was really interesting and different in her response. But like the fact that she was able to recognize it was super, super awesome. Well, awesome. Well, Nancy, thank you very much for the conversation. You know me. I love an organized, systematic approach to about everything in my life because it just makes it easier for us to manage. Because to go back to the place we started, one, by having a systematic approach like this, it gives us the ability to not feel overwhelmed by everything. And two, it gives us the ability to find the things that work for us that make them repeatable so we can do them over and over again. Like after I learned the tapping and I try and do it on my own, I have one experience of it good, me trying on my own, it's bad. Well, it's now a coin flip of whether or not it works. But by giving our way ourselves of doing this, we're reinforcing the resources being valuable and durable. So we reach for it again and again in conscious and unconscious ways. So I just really appreciate you sharing your approach.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gene. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
As you can see, when we are gentle with ourselves and we give ourselves permission to start, there's lots of ways that we can move forward in a really easy, efficient way. Nancy has put together a free 5-part training on how to safe and effectively use a trauma-informed approach to EFT. If you are listening to this in sort of a podcast app, if you go into the show notes, you'll see a link. If you happen to be listening to this in the website itself, up above the player, you can see a link to that free 5-part guide. And if you happen to be listening to this somewhere else and you don't have access to those links, if you go to tappingqa.com/472, which is this episode number, then you're going to be in a situation where you can see that link and you can access that for free. The other thing to remind you of is I'm doing a 2-day training on mastering the art of delivery. The art of delivery is figuring out what to say, how to say it, and to do it in the most effective way. What we shared with you today are a number of really simple, great things that you can do, and just see how far we've come in just a short 30-minute conversation. Imagine how much sharper your tapping tools are going to be and how much easier it is going to be for you to get to root causes if you spend 2 days with practitioners and non-practitioners alike from all over the world. Go to masteringtheartofdelivery.com, masteringtheartofdelivery.com. Use the coupon code podcast and you'll get 50% off of that training. If, after reading the information on the training, if you have questions, please reach out, Gene, Gene, at tappingqna.com. If you know someone in your life who would really appreciate the conversation that we just had today, please pass it along. Be our ambassador. The easiest and most efficient way for people to find new pieces of content is from the recommendation of a friend or someone that they trust. And so this is an opportunity for you to share that amazing information with other people in your life. Don't spam your inbox. Don't send it to everybody in the world. If you know one or two people who would really appreciate this conversation, please be our ambassador and pass it along. As always, you can subscribe to the podcast everywhere you get audio: Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Pandora. Sometimes it says subscribe, sometimes it says follow. The thing that is important to remember in podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future, or someone you think I should be interviewing, you can always reach me, Gene, Gene, at tappingqna.com, or just click on the contact link on the website. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli and Tapping Q&A.